Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubn here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is echoes, echoes of past cycles that bring back a an a visceral experience of a past that may have even been forgotten. And we're going to talk about these cycles. Should be a fun conversation. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So good to be with you this morning. So we are talking today about echoes. And this conversation comes about through another conversation where a friend was talking about the cycles of the planets and a new karmic cycle beginning. I guess it begins every 18 years or 18 and a half years, something like that. Hey, Rosalind, welcome, welcome. Good morning. So good to have you joining us. And welcome to everybody else who's joining us as well. So what was interesting is to be able to look back at what was happening for the beginning of this last cycle. And there was a lot of upheaval that created sort of an emotion, a real extreme emotional challenge for an extended period of time, actually. And in looking back, it was really, really interesting to notice or to remember that there was a certain emotional pallor to that time. And the celestial cycles are repeating, and there are echoes of that emotional pallor that have been relatively indistinct. So a lot of them, a lot of the emotional tone has been sort of an underlying tone, sort of an indistinct but disruptive tone. And it's interesting because there were some events that occurred that kind of reactivated that older trauma and that presented as a current trauma. And what occurred to me in this conversation yesterday was that it's almost like echoes of that time sort of coming forward as the celestial cycle is repeating, coincidentally or not, unlikely coincidentally, right? It's a very interesting thing when we look at triggers and emotional patterns and consider the possibility that some of these triggers, some of our emotional interpretations, some of our experiential patterns could be connected with celestial cycles. Not a new idea. I mean, astrology's been around for forever, but to bring that into our lives to say, oh, wow, it's almost like really an echo from the past, like a body memory that is saying when there's certain influences, energetic influences, it acts as a larger trigger, perhaps, that reactivates the memory of that energetic field. I think this is distinct from just the kinds of triggers that I normally think about, where they are experiential triggers, circumstantial triggers, where somebody says something or does something, or there's a situation that is very reminiscent on a conscious level, that of a prior experience, and it acts as a trigger. Whereas this situation is, I guess it is very similar, but it's maybe, to me anyway, it's more nuanced in that we're talking about, in this case, it was the beginning of what was called a karmic cycle. And so this is a new karmic cycle that has some of the texture and tone of the prior one because of certain energetic influences, and it occurs to me sort of as a field, of an energetic field that has certain emotional states, certain physiological states sort of associated with it, that as these transits occur, as these energies shift and change, the energetic field in which we reside shifts and changes. And even if we're at a different place, it's kind of this spiral, we're revisiting the place, but with a new sense of self, a new way of being. We're not the same being, but there's this same or very familiar kind of field that we then get to engage with. And as part of that field, it's a bigger dynamic of energies that are beyond the seen influences, perhaps. And I understand that anybody who understands astrology, for example, would say, yeah, of course. Yes, that's how it works. But it's just dawning on me in a new way to say, oh, wow, there are certain characteristics of what happened when this configuration or these energies were previously present. And it's almost like a hangover is what I'm thinking, where it hadn't really been present. And then a hangover is not a really great literal analogy, but it's almost like they're in that field, it's holding the knowledge and the experience from the last encounter with that field. And so that comes along with it sort of as some extra encoding or programming. And we get to, for me, recognizing that could be the case, that there's this larger dynamic, and that the last time that field was in place, there was a lot of trauma. So now it's in place and it's sort of reactivating or revisiting that same energies, and the body has a memory of, oh boy, when that energy was here before, it sort of wiped the floor with me, so that there could be this underlying maybe even dread around it, that when we bring it to conscious awareness, it gives us an opportunity to heal that and to clear that field. It's like bringing back, it's kind of like revisiting a city where something happened that was traumatic, and you revisit that city, and there's that pallor over the experience until you clear whatever that was. And you don't remember necessarily the trauma that you experienced there until you step foot in the city, and then bam, there it is again. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of as a relatively fair parallel, to say, there are cycles, and being alert to those cycles can maybe allow us to move through them in an elevated way, rather than becoming at the effect of it in so full a way, that we can exercise our awareness to shift our experience. It's kind of like when we go through cycles of change, and the spirals of change. It is really the same thing, except it's talking about maybe specific energetic fields. But how many times have we experienced something coming up, and it was like, oh my gosh, I thought I'd already dealt with this. I thought I'd already healed this. I thought it's been with me forever and ever, and here it is again. But the thing to recognize is that when it's here again, we're not the same person. We're not interacting with it from the same level of presence or being. And therefore, it becomes the spiral of change and evolution. And it's kind of like that, I think, with the cycles, the celestial cycles, the planetary cycles. It makes sense to understand that, of course, those energies of the universe are all interrelated. We know that the moon affects the tides, right? Why wouldn't it affect us, right? So if we can think of it as these ever-changing energy fields that are creating all different kinds of cycles and transformations that we get to interact with. The thing that I guess is the revelation here is that these cycles are for most of us, unless we're steeped in astrology, for example, they're cycles that are invisible to us, that are not in our conscious awareness. And so when we see the correlations between these cycles and our experience, it can be kind of mind-blowing. It's like, wow, what in the world? Isn't that interesting to be able to have some kind of lexicon in the heavens, that or some kind of Rosetta Stone of sorts in the heavens that can help us decipher and decode some of the fields that we move through, or the energetic influences that we move through, in the course of our lives and our civilizations. And I I think that so many of us poo-poo astrology, and maybe, well, because we consider that it's not science. But I wonder, as we're looking at the movement of the cosmos as uh, as everything reflecting everything else, as everything having some level of intelligence and consciousness, and all these different energies interacting, for me to be thinking of what's happening with astrology as fields of influence is just really, really fascinating to be um, considering, certain energies are more disruptive than others. And um, like we know that the energy in a city is very different, a very different energetic field than the energy in the mountains, that in nature's mountains, where there's no civilization, is very, very, very radically different energetic field. And part of our orientation is that if we can't see it and we can't measure it directly, the energetic input of it, that it doesn't exist if we can't measure it. And yet, I guess, over millennia, um, the harmonies of the spheres have been measured, at least in terms of position, being able to articulate specific impacts of the different configurations is something that has emerged over great expanses of time. But I mean, in a way, it's funny to me that all of a sudden there's this new perspective for me on how all this stuff works. We know that the cycles of the moon and the sun impact us. We know that it impacts our weather, that it impacts our the growing seasons and other life forms on Earth, right? We know these things, and yet we've been kind of stubbornly, at least as a culture, stubbornly oblivious and dismissive of these other influences, probably because we like to think that we're in control of our lives, probably because we like to think that we have autonomy, whereas in fact we're really more part of a greater system of life and intelligence expressing itself in myriad forms. And I find it really interesting to be aware of the different fields. I found it actually reassuring when I've heard, when I'm going through a tough time, and then I've heard there's some planetary things going on that are indicative of tough times or challenges. To I find it a relief, actually. Astrology is not something that I have followed very much. I mean, there was a period in my life when I was trying to understand it more deeply, but through this friend of mine who is so poetic in their understanding and expression of these influences. I'm starting to connect on a different level to these fluctuations and cycles of influential energy moving through, or that we move through. And it's just fascinating. So recently I was learning a little bit about biodynamic gardening or farming, which also is very, very attuned to the cycles of the moon, through the different um, zodiacal configurations, through the different constellations. And how the phase of the moon and the phase of the sun and the different houses and constellations impact growth of plants and when to plant them, and it was very, very fascinating. And when we think about these things in terms of energetic fields, it starts to make more sense. That we know that magnets have a field between them, that gravity is creating certain fields. It makes sense that these different fields would have impact on life, right? We know that spring is a period of growth. Well, what's spring determined by? It's cycles of planets and energies, right? Positioning of things in different configurations. So the connection that I made is that these cycles of our lives have are likely to have, hypothetically, again, my own hypothesis, not that it's unique, I mean, it's been around for centuries, but that there are echoes of our emotional memory that arise, our emotional and maybe physiological memory that arise in these different, and as these different energetic fields go through their transformations. And it creates a richer understanding that the cycles that we experience in this evolutionary spiral of growth are not arbitrary, that they're not just based on circumstance, the observable circumstance as triggers, but that the energy that we're residing in, it's not all of our own making. We're interacting with something greater that is always shifting and changing and moving, and we're dancing with those energies. So sometimes those influences can be more challenging. It's like trying to drive through the fog, if we can imagine that fog is a particular energetic state, so I guess the insight for me here is to expand my awareness beyond the visible, that there are influences upon us that are beyond our capacity to see with our conventional senses. And perhaps we get to expand our senses and our sense of awareness to include these other influences, and maybe to even be tuning in more directly with them so that we can be more aware of their guidance and influence. Anyway, that it's a thought. That's the thought for today. And I think that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And as always, it's my honor and privilege to be able to have these morning musings and share them with you. And I have so much gratitude and appreciation for that opportunity. So until next time, so much love to you.